It is 6:35 on Monday, May 21st. I'll call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. A few announcements to start with. Regular 3 announcements. This meeting is being taped by 1623 Studios for future broadcasts. The meeting is being filmed by volunteers from 1623 Studios. Meeting is being taped by town minute taker Gail Hunter. For accuracy in minutes, anyone else who is recording the meeting is asked to notify the chair at this time. And then lastly, all members of the board and meeting and people in the audience are asked to turn off or silence their phones at this time. All right, so couple of announcements. As you can see, we're running a little sparse tonight. One member is out of town, another one is under the weather. I would like to welcome our newest board member, Becky Jakes. She will be here serving you for at least the next 3 years. So welcome to Becky.
Thank you.
Our usual item 0 on the agenda is to ask anybody if they have any public comment on something that's not on the agenda tonight. Is there anybody has any comments for things that are not on the agenda tonight?
It's a beautiful spring day.
It is a nice spring day.
I have a comment.
Yeah. So you need a microphone and state your name, etc.
So Maureen McCarthy. I live in 62 Marmion Way, Rockport, Massachusetts, and I manage a number of LLCs that own 84, 86, and 90 School Street.
Is your comment going to be related to your item, which is first on the
No.
agenda?
No.
Okay.
So anyway, recently I read about the suit, $500,000 from the police department. I want to tell you that I have personally had very negative experience with Christopher Locke, Officer Locke. I have done complaints about him. In my opinion, he is a liability to the town. It's pretty egregious that this settlement was done. And so I just want you to know that, in my personal opinion, he continues to be an issue in the town.
Item number 1 on our agenda is a short-term paying guest license application for 84, 86, and 90 School Street. So this is an application for all 3 rentals to be doing short-term rentals, that is, rentals that are 5 nights or fewer. And we've read through the application, and one concern that we have, or has been voiced to me by members of the board who are not here tonight, is that the town bylaw says that the residences to which we can apply these permits have to be owner occupied. And it's my understanding that none of these buildings are owner occupied. Is that accurate?
Yeah, but that's not my interpretation of this. I've owned these properties for over 10 years, and I've been doing VRBO short-term for 7 of those years. And I worked with the people who were your town clerks when these were done, okay? As far as I'm concerned about this,
When what were done, I'm sorry.
when this was all being
Oh.
negotiated.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, you'll need to. When you say this, you need to be specific because.
I'm sorry.
I don't know, I can't see that piece of paper.
Sure. So the town bylaw, section 20C, when this was all being negotiated, I was speaking with the town clerks because they know that I owned short-term rentals and I've been dealing it with this way. This article was brought into case because of Airbnb, people doing 1 or 2 day rentals, okay? That was initially, and if you read the minutes, you'll see that's where they came up. This applicability, as far as I'm concerned, this doesn't preclude people who are not owner occupied. This applicability is only for people who are living in the house. There are rental regulations relative to safety and those types of things that already exist in the Massachusetts state laws, okay? You are not needed to dictate for rentals what kind of safety needs are there. Those are already there. This is for these short-term rentals where you have somebody staying in your house. You're not a professional renter. You know, you don't have to adhere to the traditional rental bylaws, which I do, all right? And I've been doing this for many years. And the intent of this never was to preclude people who are not owner-occupied. That was never the intent of this. And even Greg, when this came up last year, even his interpretation was, oh, we'll just fill this out. Maybe this is poorly.
Don't put words in
Sorry.
my mouth, please. I did not say that.
Okay, what did you ask me to do when I told you that that I was, you knew I wasn't living there? And I have your email, so go ahead.
Right,
Why don't
right.
you tell me what you told me to do?
My suggestion was if you wanted to pursue it, that you would have to ask for a waiver from what the bylaw says.
No, so that's okay. We'll agree to disagree, and I have your emails.
I have it here as well.
Okay, great. No, I was given the form to basically fill out, you know, saying for this here. You know, my personal opinion is if I do the rentals short-term, you know, it's here nor there. My concern is that the town of Manchester has totally been targeting myself and my properties. The Board of Selectmen, a few months ago, put a huge restriction in front of my property not to park 50 feet. Since that house was built in 1917, nobody had an issue with the fact that there was parking in my house, in front of this house that I bought, okay? I buy the house, and all of a sudden, there's no parking. If you read the minutes for that, even the Board of Selectmen, one of the gentlemen here said, that's pretty egregious to ask for 50 feet, okay? But you guys went ahead with it. And you went ahead with it because the neighbors are complaining. The neighbors don't like rentals. They don't like my rentals. And you're responding to it.
Okay, hang on a minute. I'm going to catch up with a few things that you've said here. So first of all, I'll go backwards. On the parking side of things, we never make changes to parking unless we get an opinion from the police with regard to the safety implications of the parking. And one of the requests was made there was that they wanted to address the safety of the parking and the travel in and out of those roads. And whatever you may feel about it, the police delivered to us a pretty objective assessment. And it was very much on the basis of that and other observations that led us to make the decisions that we made with the parking there. Certainly, it was never the case that we as a board target an individual. That's absurd. We never do that. It's never
You
even
let your
entered my mind.
residents target you. You let your residents target people. So let me ask you a question.
Actually,
There are a number of intersections on School Street. Why is the intersection in front of my house the only one that was changed?
well, because that was the one where we had a number of people making requests and where we did an
Exactly.
analysis after it.
Exactly.
But we made our changes based on the analysis, not just on the neighbors' requests.
Right.
So your presumption that this board is specifically targeting you is false. We're here actually to serve as an avenue for people to make requests for changes and to make those changes based on the merit of the changes, not on the fact that a particular neighbor is maybe
Right.
going after
But
another
you would
neighbor.
not have even ever addressed that issue, except for the fact that my neighbors
I don't know,
complained.
but it doesn't
Well,
matter. It's
I know,
neither
it was
here-
there since
Okay,
1917.
Actually, you know what? This is actually not germane to the thing that's in front of us right now.
You brought it up.
No, ma'am, you brought it up. Now,
You said you wanted to respond to it.
okay. As far as the letter of the law for the short-term paying guests is concerned, we did check with our legal, and the law is really, really quite specific. It says that shall be allowed only in properties. The rental of residential premises to short-term paying guests shall be allowed only in properties whose owners have obtained an annual license. And then in applicability, it says the rental of residential premises to short-term paying guests is allowed in owner-occupied residential premises pursuant to being licensed in accordance with this bylaw. It doesn't make an exception for owners for houses
So
that are not
let me tell you how I
owner-occupied.
interpret it. It
And-
says, shall be
Wait,
allowed.
wait, ma'am,
only-
ma'am, stop. I actually don't really care how you interpret it. What matters right now is how our legal counsel interprets it, and how it's likely that the state will interpret it, and how this board will interpret it.
So have you
Now-
reviewed the minutes of this discussion and what their intention was?
It does not,
No, it doesn't matter.
so,
So, I'm going to, no, the way I interpret this is, this was, the purpose here is just to talk about, that restriction shall be, because it even makes an exception. The rental of residential to short-term again, not otherwise expressly licensed for such purpose or other proper authority, which I already had, shall be allowed only in properties whose owners have obtained an annual license. That's all it's saying. If you're a short-term and you're an owner of that property, you need to get that short-term license. And you know, I'm going to stop at this point, and I'll be back at your next meeting, and I will ask you to review the minutes when this was originally made, because this was not the intent of this. You may be enforcing it that way, but that's not the intent. So anyway, for 90 School Street, it's owner occupied. So why don't you talk about that application?
While he's doing that, a point of clarification, are you a resident of Manchester or Rockport?
Rockport.
It does say here, tenant occupied, though.
I adjusted it. So if you could have just adjusted, I had originally submitted it owner occupied, and Greg thought it was an error. So it is, you can correct it. It's owner
I'm not going
occupied.
to correct your application.
who's the owner of 90?
It's a LLC.
What?
It's a LLC called Deegan LLC.
So, how is it owner occupied?
Because what are the members of the LLC lives there?
Okay.
But where does it say that one of the owners lives there? I didn't see anything about that.
If you want, I can modify the application. There's a thing there that says if it's owner occupied. Greg and I had this discussion last night. So Greg, did you modify it to say, Greg, you sent me an email saying they all said they were owner occupied?
Correct, I did send that email.
Right, and did you modify my application?
No, I did not.
Okay. So I don't know why, when Greg interpreted it, he thought they were all owner occupied, and only one is owner occupied. That's 90. And if there's an incorrection, I'll correct it now, or at least I'm telling you it's owner occupied.
It's really incumbent upon you to modify that. I don't,
Correct, I'm not going to modify your
can't ask
application.
someone to modify it. And so when it says Deegan Partners, that's actually Deegan LLC?
Yes.
Okay, the insurance that you had listed here, I didn't see anywhere where it states specifically number 90. I saw that both the 86 and the 84, those addresses were noted on the insurance papers. there was nothing on the insurance papers that I could find pertaining
I'll-
to 90.
I will look at that. That is 90, but I'll look at it to see how you can feel confident it has insurance.
And additionally, just, I know that you wrote that the insurance was paid, but there's nothing that shows us that it was paid, other than you saying it was paid. So the insurance doesn't show the exact address, nor does it show that it was actually
You know,
paid.
I'll look at that, you know, if you need, if,
I'm just asking
well,
because
maybe
these
you
are
should be
things that need to
more
be.
clear if you want to show, if you want a statement from the insurance company. And maybe, why don't you do this? Why don't you look at the previous applications and see what they provided for a receipt?
I'm only looking at the application
Oh,
in
I
front of
think we
us.
should be consistent.
Are we done there? Are we close to done there? 'Cause it sounds
yeah.
like she's got some work to do.
Yeah.
So the 84 and 86, I'm not sure that we would grant you a waiver on, based on what we have in front of us tonight. 90, I think we'd like to see the paperwork updated for that and have you come back with us to the updated paperwork. And if that's owner occupied, we'll approve that one.
Great, thank you. And I will see you guys for my Chapter 40B that I'm working on.
Is that, I'm just curious, is that a threat?
No, it's a promise.
That's your prerogative.
Yeah, it totally is. That's that property. Weekly. Have a good day.
That's a cheerful beginning.
It's a nice spring day out there. It's a really
Go back to
beautiful
your
day.
beginning.
It's a beautiful, it is a lovely day. And, so that's that, all right.
Item number 2, continuing a public hearing for requests for public tree removals on Vine Street and Lincoln Street, and a new one for Old Essex Road. So, welcome back, gentlemen. Just to give everybody a short bit of process here. So, because this is a public hearing for 2 separate tree removals, what we're going to be doing is we're going to discuss both the individual tree removal applications under the hearing, then we'll close the hearing, and then we'll vote on the separate tree removals. So, yes, Adele. You can yell, or you can, Greg, could you hand Adele her microphone?
Adele Irvin, 113 Ocean Street. I think at our last meeting, didn't you vote for the removal of one tree?
That was for a separate tree hearing. There were
That's
two
separate from
separate ones.
these.
Yep.
Yeah, so we've already voted to the removal of that one.
Not
Or you
on, that was a totally separate tree. That was, this is for the corner of
Right.
Lincoln and
I'm
Vine.
I'm just interested in the number of trees at the moment.
The number of trees total that are being discussed are 4 on this property, and then
Yes.
1 more on Old Essex Road.
Yes, I will comment later then, thank you.
Okay. All right, now, for those people who were not here at our last hearing, I'm going to summarize very briefly. This is the property on the corner of Lincoln and Vine Street. It has been subdivided, and these gentlemen are looking to build a new residence on Vine Street. They made an application for 2 curb cuts, and they'd made a request to take out 2 trees that were impinged upon by the curb cuts, and in addition to 2 other trees that are on Vine Street. And we asked them to do another round of review for it, potentially go back to the planning board with the information about the fact that 2 curb cuts were going to require the removal of town trees. And since then, the applicants have worked with the town and I believe Tom Henderson and Sue Brown, and come up with a compromise position. And do you mind if I summarize the compromise position, and you can correct me if there's any things that are off in that? So in the compromise position, the tree on Lincoln Street.
Yep, which is right on
Yep.
the driveway.
They're going to adjust the curb cut application there, and the planning board says that they can make a de minimis change, which does not require the developer to go back before the planning board, and that will preserve that tree. The developer and Tom Henderson, our tree warden, will work to preserve the other two trees.
Which are these in front of the house?
Yep. As well as the one on Lincoln Street, which will be near to the construction of the new driveway. And that leaves the one tree that's closest to Lincoln Street on Vine Street, which the developer is asking still to remove in order to put the curb cut there. And with the proviso that I think you said that you, my understanding is that you will replace it with another tree somewhere around the corner on the property. Was that accurate?
That's pretty accurate, I just want to make sure he said that, okay. The only one we're looking to take, the one in the driveway,
Yeah.
two in the front, and what about the one in the wetland? I mean, not the wetland, we're leaving it. We're leaving, okay, great.
Okay.
Can we do that, Bob? We're excavating that little area there for the, this is Bob Griffin. He's our engineer. He made our representation both with the town on the permits and all the plans.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we can move that depression, which is supposed to receive stormwater running off in the driveway, and probably put, a small retaining wall near the tree and still have the same volume that we had before. So as long as that's a de minimis change, I think that would be satisfactory as well.
Okay. So I'm glad that you guys were able to work with us on this. So I personally would like to, if I know the construction's challenging around there. If any of those remaining three trees, if they don't survive this, would you be willing for a period of 5 years to just replace them if they die? And I don't mean you have to replace them with 16-inch trees, obviously. 3 years?
Yeah.
Give me something here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose we could, I'm just trying to think of what's gonna happen to the trees. The trees are pretty healthy. I suppose we could agree to plant two 2-inch caliper trees in its place if they die,
Okay.
in the same location, or in the yard of that project.
So let's, I'd like to get some input from the board and the public on these suggestions.
So I just want to be crystal clear, you're going from what was originally 5 down to 1?
4.
4 down to 1, sorry.
You had 5 originally, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Tom, could I get your opinion on how, if this is gonna, if you think this is workable for protecting and saving these trees?
I think, if reasonable precautions are taken, when they excavate in there and we expose any big roots, I'd come by when they dig and, cut them off nice and smooth to try and help the trees when their roots do get exposed. I think you're making a reasonable compromise here. I know you're never gonna have, in my lifetime, or many of the lifetime, trees like that again, but these things happen, and, basically, I've looked at the trees. A couple of them that are coming down would have issues in the future, but I think if a little precaution is that what they propose to keep can survive. If that's what that's relative, to a lot of things, but there are some precautions we can take when they excavate around them that I'd be willing to go down and work with them on it, make a nice clean cut if we do have to cut a big, I'm talking the root like in this range.
Can you clarify what you just said? You said a couple of them had potential issues, and you said a couple, but they're only doing one. Is the one with the issues?
Well, my understanding is they're taking down 3 trees.
We're taking down
I just heard one.
One public
The
tree.
2 in front of the house.
Can I look at that?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, that's great.
We're gonna keep the one that is on Vine Street in the
Sure.
driveway, we're just gonna move the driveway.
Right.
The 2 that are right in front of the house are
Right.
gonna stay. We'll just move the water line a little over so that we don't cut right into that root system. And this might be far away from the sewer system that's going in there. The only one's coming down is where the driveway is.
Yeah, I mean, one has to go to.
Do you know if that one is the one that you referenced as having potential issues?
No, I think it's this one, the second one up from the driveway, the one on the corner of the old driveway has a cavity in it. This one has a scar at the base, this one has, normal for what's there, the age of the tree and things, but, they did try to maintain the trees, as I said at the last meeting, the doctor and his wife, but, that's the best I can tell you. I think that if only one tree, I mean, that's a victory for me, the way I look at it, if only one tree has to come down. The other trees, with that one gone, will do better with that one gone actually too, so that's one aspect that you have to say, they'll have more space to grow. Right now, they're all intertwined anyway.
Okay.
So, but you think, I guess one concern I would have is that if you think the two in front of the house are compromised right now,
None of these trees are compromised,
Okay,
but they
great.
have minor
Okay.
flaws that I would consider a safety hazard or anything like that.
Okay.
or
thank you.
That they're gonna go into rapid decline.
Okay, thank you.
Any more thoughts before I turn it over to the public?
No, I mean, I will confess I'm jaded by having grown up on Lincoln Street and having lived through the taking down of, 60-foot trees that completely redefined the street, and the street's never been the same since, so I will openly confess that I'm biased. Because when you lose that, it's gone. And I appreciate the rights of a private property owner, so it's not anything to do with trying to impinge on someone's attempt to develop property. It's the sake of the town losing something that's much bigger than a single property or a property owner. And again, the part of Lincoln Street on top of the hill above the high school is, it's changed completely. And it's definitely not as good.
Your thoughts?
I think that they've worked out a nice compromise, as long as we can actually have something in writing about replacing the trees if something happens, and some recourse to be able to enforce that.
Okay. Members of the public, comments and thoughts. Sue Brown.
Sue Brown, Town Planner. I just want to clarify, while they don't have to apply again to the planning board, they do need to put in a revised plan so that the planning board can look at it and then approve it for a de minimis change. So it's not a new application, but they do need to revise it as it's proposed, and the planning board will take it up at their next meeting.
Yep, just means they don't have to go through a public hearing, so they can take care of that at the June meeting instead of going
Does that
through.
stop us from applying for finishing our building permit?
No, you have an approved curb cut. This is a de minimis administrative change to that approval.
Great.
Okay, members of the public. Sounded like some of you are not thrilled. I'd like you to have your opportunity to speak. Take a microphone.
Mike Kirk, 34 Vine Street, the direct abutter. I mean, it sounds great on paper that, you're only going to take down one tree. But the idea that you could replace this with a 2-inch tree is crazy. Nothing is going to, let me ask the developer, if you feel like you can do this without damaging the other tree, will you put up, will you put your money where your mouth is? Will you, $100,000, you take those trees down?
Well, make it $1 million. I mean,
Sure. Deal?
You're asking,
No, it's a priceless tree. You're never going to see another one of these. And, you don't care about the street. You want to put up a house and make your money and you're gone, right? And I understand capitalism.
So
But
one-
we live on this street.
One thing I'm
Yep.
gonna, just step in the middle here, and I'm gonna say, we're not gonna have a conversation between you and the
Okay.
developer right
Well,
now.
he responded.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Um,
So anyway, if there's anything the board could do to make sure that these trees are protected, but through private conversations, I know the intent is to, get the permit, start digging. You're not going to know, they fill, the tree's damaged, and then, they're gone. So, it's in the planning board's hand.
Just assuming that, this probably is all going to go through, sorry, Jennifer Powers, property manager, 41 Vine Street, right across the street. Just as like a point of, question, when this construction starts going on and we have all sorts of traffic problems at that intersection, especially during school drop-off and pickup time, who do we call then? Is that like something that, like, will the construction people have to have police details, or, I'm just wondering, has anybody thought about how just putting another house on this street is going to affect just that corner? It's a very busy corner.
I understand your concern on that. I have to say that as far as this hearing is concerned, that's out of the scope for this hearing.
Okay, so I'll just,
That is, traffic control is something that the police would deal with.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I would just echo then Mike Kirk's comments that if there's any way to ensure the protection of the trees, that they're not being, intentionally harmed during the construction.
Okay. So, the town does, the building permit for the property is something that the town authorizes. Are we able to place a constraint on the building permit based on adherence to the requirements of these tree removals?
Right, so your approval to proceed with removal of one tree is conditioned on saving the other three, and then that condition then is carried forward to the building permit as well.
Okay. So there's the enforcement piece. The enforcement piece is that in order to complete their development, they have to follow through with what we set down here tonight. And I'd like to think that you've received the sentiments of the public and of the board that we really want to preserve the canopy. And like I said, appreciate that you made the efforts to compromise on this. And we will just, assuming that we vote to approve this, we will just codify the comments that in the vote, and that will be tied to the building permit. And I think, I hope that everybody would be satisfied by that.
Question, clarification?
Yes.
Just a point of clarification, how long, to the tree warden, how long does a damage to a tree take to become evident? It's not immediate, correct?
No, probably next spring you might see some signs if roots were damaged on the backside of them where they're excavating. You might see in the foliar, slow to leaf out, maybe some terminal dieback at the top of the tree.
Is that differentiable from what would naturally be just the decay of a branch as opposed to a branch dying because of damage to the root system?
Construction damage is usually, somebody who is in the business knows the difference between disease and it comes on very, in a specific way.
So the delay could be as soon as 12 months, it could be longer to become evident.
Yeah.
But a 3-year window would be sufficient.
I would think 3 years, you know what's gonna go on if we take some precaution and maybe, when they backfill, a few bales of peat would be money well spent,
Yeah.
and reasonable, I would think, to backfill if you expose any roots and have a different. And I would be willing to come down, like I say, and cut any major roots with a nice clean cut so they would wall off and sucker out, rejuvenate themselves.
I see nodding heads.
We've excavated around trees many times.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of grading that is changing these trees. it's staying pretty much at grade. I don't think we're gonna be changing that. And when we go digging the excavation and utilities, we're sensitive to it. They are 50-year-old trees, so it's hard to put a new warranty on 50-year-old trees. But I have no problem if they die for 3 years. That's reasonable. Be happy to replace them someplace. There is only one tree coming down, so I tend to decide that we do have some rights, don't we? That we can cut a tree to allow us our driveway in.
Well, you have to go through us.
Can you just remind me, I'm sorry, I don't recall this from the last time, how many units are going in? Six
Lincoln
family.
Street is remaining unchanged. There's nothing changing on Lincoln Street other than the driveway. No trees, no house. It's Vine Street, and one tree is coming down on Vine Street.
No, he answered it, it was just, yeah, thank you.
I have a question, Larry.
Yeah.
What is do you know what the lifespan of a Norway maple is typically?
How long do they live?
How long
I've
do?
seen them live 250 years.
Perfect.
And when we've taken them down. we
Okay,
do
I'm
annual
just
rates.
curious.
These are probably 75 years old right now, so they have enough, they're only like halfway through their lifespan.
Okay, good, all right.
Adele?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask the tree warden, it's my understanding a Norway maple is a scrub tree, and you don't want them if you can get rid of them. Another kind of maple is a different tree entirely. How many of these are Norway maples?
They're all Norway maples.
They're all Norway maples?
They were a tree that was widely planted in the 50s.
Yes,
They were
I know.
the
I know I have several.
We have several on the town common out.
Yeah.
Actually, which I wouldn't want taken down.
So
No,
while
but
they're,
but I think that arborists would argue differently, that's all. But I happen to feel that I wonder how much the developer could alter his building to save the trees. I mean, I don't know that we have to build the Taj Mahal there, and therefore that he could be very attentive to the size of his building. And I don't know what that is, and I don't know why it demands us to have to take so many trees. Thank you.
yeah, the developer has compromised on their building technique here, and they are going to preserve most of the trees. The only one that they're planning on taking down is where a driveway goes through. Okay.
Mike Kirk, 34 Vine Street, there was an additional tree in the back corner of the lot. Not on town property, is that still coming down?
Yeah, the dead one on our property, yes.
Okay.
Okay, any other members of the public have any comments on this particular tree? Okay. Now, here's the part that's gonna, I have to remind you back at the beginning when I said, before we close the public hearing and vote, we're gonna switch over to a different tree and talk about that. So, hang tight. Probably should have done this tree first, but that's all right. So,
It would be okay to,
what's that?
it would be okay to close this hearing and then formally open up.
Formally open the other one?
Yep,
Let's do that. Let's just do
that'd be
that.
fine.
So, any other comments from the board on this set of trees? Okay, can I get a motion to close the public hearing for the tree removals on Vine Street and Lincoln Street?
Motion to close the public hearing on the 4 trees on Lincoln and Vine Street.
And I will second that motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
You're opposed to closing the public hearing?
Opposed to the tree.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to closing the public hearing.
Okay, good. So unanimous on closing the public hearing. So I am going to move that we approve the removal of the 18-inch Norway closest on Vine Street, closest to Lincoln Street in the application to allow for the curb cut on Vine Street. With the understanding that the tree in the application on Lincoln Street will be dealt with by making a de minimis change to the curb cut application on Lincoln Street, that the developer will work with the town tree warden to preserve the remaining trees through construction, through the entire construction process. That the developer will replace the 18-inch Norway being removed with some other tree on that corner area. And that if the remaining, any of the remaining 3 trees die within a three-year period or decline significantly from the construction, that the developer will replace those with new trees, again, to be town trees.
When you say replace the 16-inch that's coming out.
18-inch.
It's the 18. All right. Are we specifying what size tree it should be replaced with? Because that's a significant tree. And
2-inch
it's town tree.
caliper of the choosing of the
Thank you.
Sorry.
shall we say, a 2-inch tree of the choosing of the town tree warden? Of the brand,
Species.
It's pretty common.
of the species chosen by the town tree warden. Is that reasonable?
Well, the question I have about the tree sizes, okay, it's a significant tree, and I understand that, you know, that concessions are being made, but a 2-inch caliper tree is pretty small, and what's the cost difference between?
That's the size it's called in the subdivision regulations of the town of Manchester.
But this is talking about trees that the town owns.
Call for planting street trees as part of the subdivision.
I guess I'd like to know what the cost difference is between a 2-inch tree, a 2-inch caliper, and if we got something a little bit bigger.
Well, if you went from 2 to 3, the cost of the planting would probably be the same. It would just be maybe $100, $150 more if you went from 2.5 to 3.5. We have found in planting around town, in these type of locations, that the smaller caliber trees tend to do better and catch up and surpass the larger ones.
Okay.
Because they destroy so many roots. I come
Okay.
from the era when it was bald and burlap, now a tree spade takes everything.
Right,
but,
right.
The smaller trees tend to thrive better and they quickly exceed the size of the other ones when we've done little trial things
Okay,
through the Friends of the Trees, so.
good to know.
I think 2.5, 2 to 2.5 would be too well there. And
Okay,
at the time, should they go, maybe we can alternate a different species, maybe a London plane tree or something, which would grow much more rapidly than the. And we're not planting Norway maples anymore anyway, as Adele says.
Right.
Some people consider them an invasive species.
Mhm.
So we have hundreds of species from they're prolific seeds is what, they seed in very well, and that's the issue.
That's okay.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, that was my motion. Can I get a second for that?
I second.
All right. Any discussion from board members? All right. Can I get a vote to approve the motion that has now been seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have an arrangement. You guys are set. So, the other tree. May I get a motion to open public hearing for the tree removal on Old Essex Road. I will make a motion to open the public hearing for a tree removal on Old Essex Road, specifically
58 Old.
58 Old Essex Road.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Tom, you want to talk to us about this tree?
Yeah, I
Let's get a microphone in here.
Okay.
Can I just say something quickly about that tree? I don't know if they accidentally put.
The one on 58 Old Essex Road? You're going to get plenty of chance. Hang on.
Originally, this was posted in the air, the sugar maple next to it on 56 was posted. So, yeah, and that was a mistake on my part. Because we had worked on that tree in the past, I assumed, and they never gave us a species of tree when I went up to look at it.
So if I want that tree taken down, I have to apply like.
The same way, yeah, the sugar maple.
That's all I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Because it said 58, but it was on
Yeah.
34, so I didn't know.
I will tell you before you apply,
Yeah.
if what I propose goes through, we will be pruning that tree very nicely in front of your house.
It's like almost, you know how it is. It's
I know, but
If it falls, it's gonna fall right on our house, so
Right.
I'll submit.
yeah, okay. Anyway, this is a 24-inch eastern red oak. It's probably part of the original forest when the street was laid up. It's probably 125 to 150 years old. When I first saw it, when it was just beginning to break bud, I saw a few large pieces of deadwood in it, which is common for forest trees, that type of tree that hadn't been maintained. We had pruned it in past, taking some lower branches off for the homeowner. This tree, to me, is in the prime of its health and life, and we have very few nice red oaks like that, especially in that neighborhood. I would suggest that we look at the tree again in August, prune it in August, and I believe the tree is relatively safe for another 100 years. Where it's a red oak and they're not affected by the salt the way the maple trees are, I'd hate to see a tree like that removed, especially where we're emphasizing Manchester as a green community. We've worked so hard with the kids in the high school emphasizing the importance of trees through the Friends of the Trees. In my opinion, the tree has many, many years of life. I appreciate the owner's concern, but that's not my issue. All I'm here really is to evaluate the tree and its value to the town of Manchester.
So the letter from the owner indicates that they've had damage to their tree and cars in front of their house from limbs falling off the tree. Do you believe that the tree needs some pruning to prevent that sort of thing from happening in the future? You?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely needs improving.
Okay. But you think if we prune it, that will mitigate the hazard to their property? Remove the hazard?
My feeling, yeah.
Hang on. Comments and questions from folks on the board so far?
No.
All right, comments from the public. Adele, where'd your mic go? Oh, it's over here now.
We gotta get a better system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to encourage the tree warden and the selectmen to consider pruning. Pruning is absolutely vital to the health of a tree. I have only a 7/8 of an acre, but I have I have oaks and lindens and I do a great deal of pruning because wind does a lot of damage, and we get a lot of wind here. And I think we can do many good things with our trees in town if we were more attentive to the thinning and pruning of those trees, because they can withstand almost anything. I didn't lose a branch in this last winters and so forth, because I keep my trees very well pruned so that they can deal with the wind, and they're wonderfully resilient. I have 100-year-old oaks and no problems. So I do encourage the whole concept of looking first to pruning the trees before you think you have to remove them. I don't care where you are in town. Thank you.
Any other members of the public have a comment on this particular tree? Okay, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close the public hearing on, regarding the tree at 58 Old Essex Road.
Bill, second?
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? So I will make a motion to take the tree warden's advice to prune this tree so as to remove the hazard to the house at 58 Old Essex Road, and to review the tree over the coming months to see about its continued health status.
I second that motion.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that takes care of item 2 on the agenda. Thank you, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you all.
Thank
Welcome
you.
to you guys.
Thank you very much.
Sheila, to Greg, how is our insurance on tree damage to residents?
Well, most of, we cover it if we knew about it and did not take action. So most of the
So in the case of
damages,
this-
we
In the
don't.
case of this tree, how would that be interpreted?
So if we were to now not do any pruning,
No, if we were to prune, but
Yes.
there's subsequently, regardless of the pruning, something from this particular tree, then what happens?
well, that'll be a judgment call by our insurance carrier in terms of was what caused the damage,
Sure. Yeah.
should that have been known to us or not.
But our carrier does cover this specifically. Yeah. I would assume so, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
All right, so running a little bit behind, but that's not too terribly surprising. So we have a public hearing for conduit on Vine Street, National Grid. Come on up. And can I get a motion to open the public hearing for the conduit on Vine Street?
Motion to open the hearing, National Grid hearing on the conduit in Vine Street.
And I will second that. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Have a microphone, introduce yourself to the crowd here tonight, and let's go.
Peter Mahabir, representing National Grid, 44 River Street, Beverly, Massachusetts. This is to provide upgraded service to 28 Vine Street.
And can you describe the work that you're going to be doing?
Trenching across the street from an existing pad mount between 31 and 33, and going diagonally to a customer-owned handhole on 28's property.
All right, will power be cut to houses on the street, and will the road need to be closed for any period of time?
There should be no power outage at that location unless something happens.
Yep, but you're not planning on it, so you don't have to notify anybody. And as far as the road closure is concerned?
There should be none.
Okay. All right. Questions from board members?
Is there, just, I'm trying to recall that section of the street with utility truck, is there clear passage? What's the width of passage if you're not closing the street for traffic?
It says 50 feet.
Okay.
So they should be able to work on one side of the street, do what they have to do, and then work
I'm
on
just
the other
thinking
side.
of the truck, the utility truck that I'm assuming is gonna be there.
A backhoe will be there.
Okay.
When do you anticipate doing the work? Roughly?
We're scheduling 6 weeks out,
Okay.
barring any emergencies that might be pushed out.
Yep. All right. Any other questions from board members?
It also says that the street will be repaved to original or better condition.
We try.
We check.
I know.
Just want to be sure.
Okay.
Members of the public have any comments on this one? Okay, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close the public hearing.
All right, and I'll
Second.
second. Becky will second it. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, can I get a motion to approve the National Grid conduit work? To install conduit in the public way in the vicinity of 28 and 33 Vine Street, with the condition that the road be returned to as good or better condition when they are done.
Make a motion.
You can get a second for that?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? You're done. Thank you very much. Okay. Bought back sometime. We're now into the public forum for preparing for climate change impacts. And who am I turning this over? Am I turning this over to Newt?
I'll kick us off and turn it over to Mary and Barbara shortly.
You got it. That's it. Sign there.
So we're here tonight nearing the end of another process for the town in terms of identifying our high-risk areas, our vulnerable areas to various aspects of climate change, whether that be storm surge or sea level rise, or even droughts and susceptibility to wildfires when the gravelly pond is very low. So a wide range of problems. Mary Riley has been working with us for the last 5 years on a series of studies focusing on Sawmill Brook, focusing on green infrastructure opportunities, looking at our hazardous mitigation plan, getting that updated to include the impacts of climate change, et cetera. We've received close to $400,000 worth of grant funds to do these efforts, and have made some very good progress. Tonight's meeting is focusing on what's called the Municipal Vulnerability Program, or Preparedness Program. We received a small grant, $15,000 grant, to do this phase of our efforts, which is really geared towards engaging the public more, and to making sure that what we're thinking are our problems are indeed is what the public feels is the case. So we contracted with the Salem Sound Coast Watch. Barbara Warren is their director, and she has been leading this project with Mary. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to the both of you.
Is this on, or do I?
Yes,
Yep,
it's on.
yep,
It's
it's
already
on.
on, okay. And, what's that? Yes, it goes out there, yeah. So this is the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, and we have a core team, which was on the other. And just raise your hand in the room if you're a member of the core team, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people here that, and Greg, 5, 6, that are on this core team. We held, so let's go to the next one, yep. This was started just this past year by the state. They're trying to get every town or city in Massachusetts to do this process. They want it to be community-led, that employs local knowledge, partnerships with leverage of existing efforts, which Manchester's done a lot, mainstream climate change into planning, and look at communities as being the local innovators. They want the reports that we are going to be generating, and the matrix, which I'm going to show you later, to help frame coordinated statewide efforts. So they're looking at this as, as the whole statewide effort. Next one. So we held 2 community resilience workshops, one on a Saturday, one on a Tuesday, with 55 different people attending, residents, businesses, town employees, and town committee members. And we were asked to do, there was a sort of a template given to all the MVP providers to follow, and this is a community resilience building process with climate change as the drivers.
And the state has hired Northeast Climate Science Center at UMass Amherst to look at the global predictions for climate change and bring them down to a more local level. So they've actually brought them down to a county level in some cases, looking at temperature, precipitation, and sea level. Okay. So we were asked at this workshop to identify just 4 hazards. If you're familiar with the FEMA plan, there's like 16 hazards, and you have to answer how the community is going to respond to all of them. But in this case, we're just to pick 4, okay? And then we are looking at assets. What are the assets of the community, the features in the community that are valuable, that are vulnerable, but also can be a strength. So for example, I'm not going to mention it tonight because there's short time limit, but the schools were listed as a strength. They're not going to be flooded by any of these or necessarily impacted by these hazards, but they were listed and they will be written up as a strength in the community. And then after that, we had to come up with actions. And the actions could already be identified by Manchester, but they also could be new ideas. And the idea was to advance long-term positive outcomes. And the actions had to come up with a priority and a time frame as well. So the 4 top hazards that the group came up with, the 2 different workshops: coastal flooding, inland flooding, severe weather, and drought. And I'm going to just go through some of the slides that we presented and talked about during that workshop. So coastal flooding. With the effects of climate change, sea level rise is expected by mid-century to increase by 1.1 feet up to 2.7 feet. These are all projections. So there's a whole range of possibilities depending on what the CO2 is and what the world is doing. The worst case would be 2100, would be 9.5 feet, 9.7 feet. So they're not looking at it being higher than that. It would include more severe storms, more frequency of severe storms, or more damaging storm surge. So this, in blue here, comes from the climate.org, and it says that if we had a 2-foot sea level rise, would more than triple the frequency of coastal flooding across the Northeast without any change in storms. And regardless of whether these storms are getting stronger, they are occurring over an ocean that is fuller because it's warmer, so it is expanded. And this all makes it easier for storms to push more water on shore and flood. So this is a picture of some inundation modeling that was done in a technical memorandum for Manchester. This was done by Ty and Bond with funding that Manchester got from FEMA to look at climate change impacts, and this was done in 2015. And so what we're seeing here is shallow coastal flooding, a model of what it would look like in 2025, and then the next one is how it would change to 2050. So if you go back, we're looking at that 2025 in the parking lot would be about a 33% chance of shallow coastal flooding, where in 2050 it would go up to a 66% chance. Okay. This is a map. It doesn't just sort of focus in on the pink, and inside the pink along the harbor, you'll see sea level rise as is projected. And this was also done by the FEMA grant that was for the climate impacts to Manchester. And 23% of community assets in the near term would be affected by sea level. Almost 37 would be by 2100.
They're assets?
These are the assets.
Assets of the town?
Yes, of the town. So like the town hall, the fire department, the wastewater treatment plant. But if you look at the storm surge, you can see that Manchester is much more impacted by storm surge, which we certainly saw this past winter. So that rises 33% of community assets and by 2025 would be impacted, and that goes up to over 50%.
It'll be sooner than that.
Yeah, well, we all have our opinions, that's for sure.
Are these particular models under the 1.1 foot or the 2+ foot.
Okay, this is an inundation risk modeling that was done, and it is based on the IPCC. So it was done before the state did their projections that I mentioned earlier. So I would have to go back and try to figure that one out. But basically what
These
we're
are a
trying
little
to...
more conservative, actually.
Okay, so Greg says these are actually more conservative than what the state is predicting or projecting now. But what's really clear is that the harbor and the downtown going up Sawmill Brook are heavily impacted.
The blue bar covers, the blue bar covers the train tracks and.
And the wastewater treatment plant,
Yes,
right? I was
yeah.
trying to get it into everybody's view, but we will come back to those. So people have found this diagram pretty helpful because it talks about storm surge, and you can see the top one. If you say, well, 2010, that's, currently now we've got our high tide. This past winter, we had a storm surge on top of an extreme astronomical high tide, and we saw what kind of damage it did. So now go up to 2050, and we have a projected high tide. So the tide is going to get higher. What does that mean? The storm surge actually goes inland further. And then by 2100, your building basically is going to be flooded by every high tide, and the storm surge goes even further. So just thinking, that's a good diagram visual of how high tide and storm surge work together.
Nothing is going the other way.
No, it's not going the other way. Inland flooding, we know that Manchester is affected by inland flooding now. There are expected to be changes in heavy precipitation. With every 1 degree C of warming, the air can hold 7% more moisture. And we have a warming climate, so there's going to be more water in the atmosphere. And if you look at the map of the United States on the left, it's projected that New England is going to see the most increase in heavy precipitation. And the graph on the right basically starts at, it's a little hard to see, but this is about where we are now, and you can see this is the days of annual precipitation over 2%, and it's going to keep going up. So this again is from the technical memorandum of potential climate change impacts to Manchester done in 2015. And the stakeholder workshops, they didn't see this until afterwards, but it shows that the sea level rise, storm surge, extreme precipitation, severe storms are the hazards that were picked up from this other work that this town has done. The one that was not, has not been talked about before is drought. And this is the first time drought was recognized in Manchester as a future hazard because the average and extreme temperatures are going to go up. Number of days a year with a daily maximum temperatures above 90 degrees could increase by 31 days by mid-century, 68 days by the end of the century. So you know what it's like when we get a heat wave of 3 days or more of 90 degrees, and now we're looking at 31 days a year or more. And then annual average temperature increases 3 to 6% degrees Fahrenheit by mid-century, potentially up to almost 11 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. So
How does that equate with the rainfall, which we're supposed to have so much more of?
Well, again, as it gets hotter, there's more moisture going up into the atmosphere. Some places will have droughts, and other places will have, and we don't know what it's going to be. So
It changes the way.
yeah. So they are predicting that the precipitation will happen in the winter. So we might just get, flash flooding in the winter, or ice storms, not less snow, and then we could have a drought in the summer.
Yeah.
So, which is what we've had in 16, 17. So there was a very strong consensus by the workshop participants that Manchester should be concerned about the town's drinking water supply and making sure there's sufficient water to fight potential wildfires if there are drought conditions. So this is a list of all the current planning efforts related to hazard mitigation. We're going to have to change this. We didn't put in the FEMA climate one that we did just, the town did in 2015. So going to add that under the FEMA one. But you can see the master planning is ongoing, and I believe they're going to take the recommendations from the MVP process and incorporate that into the different sectors of the master planning. A lot of work on the Sawmill Brook, comprehensive emergency management plan, comprehensive wastewater management plan, a lot of study on the wastewater treatment plan with the climate resilience, the open space and recreation plan. So Manchester has put a lot of energy into looking at this.
Where is the,
I think you've done one of these.
Yeah.
if a lot of the previous maps are true, where is the accounting of town utilities? Like there's this flooding, salt water. I know we constantly talk about what happens to the wastewater treatment plant. What happens to the main power lines going through the town that all of a sudden are submerged for extended periods of time? We're going to lose power, not just in that section of town. We're going to lose power in the entire town.
You're right.
And that could be for extended periods.
Mm-hmm.
Is there consideration of what we do in that event?
So let's go through the actions.
I was
And
just looking at this list, and there's nothing to operationally account for some of this coming
do
to
you know
be.
if any of those have been looked at? Maybe in the engineering, public service?
So the utilities, there is a utility section in the hazard mitigation plan. I'm not recalling exactly if it addresses that issue.
What happens if it's compromising to drinking water in any of the lines passing through that section? I'm thinking just
Right,
of Sawmill, for example.
Yep.
Like what happens if the utility mains are compromised?
Yep.
There's a lot of very practical reality stuff to the town operations that have a heck of a lot more to do with that section than that section of town has to do with everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's the plan if the town goes down?
Do you have that in the master plan at all?
No, so I think that's probably what you're expecting to come out of this.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
This is kind of the first time that was brought up. I know at the meeting that I was at, people were discussing that very thing, what about the.
Well, this is one of the big learnings from Sandy, right, in New York. Like, they never, I guess some people thought about it, but they never really prepared for the subways to flood.
Right.
And so it's not just the storm and the residual effect of the water, it's people can't get to work for the next couple months. So if we lose power, storm
Yes.
passes, gone, the water recedes, we still don't have power. Like, what do we do?
So that was a big concern expressed in the workshop, and people didn't look at it as a one-day event or a three-day event. They were really looking like, well, what happens if we don't have power for a month? What happens if we don't have the cell towers, that they've all come down and we've lost communication?
Yeah.
So definitely there's that
I would just
concern.
make sure that there's some analysis, contingency planning done
Good.
sooner than later.
So let's go on with the actions. Again, this isn't really clear, but that people had a map of all the assets that were identified for the FEMA. And again, they could look at those assets. They could also add new assets. So this is what we were doing in the workshop.
$1 billion worth of downtown.
Yeah. And what we have to come up with in the end is this risk matrix. So you see your 4 hazards going across the top, the assets down the side for infrastructure, environment, and societal, and then a series of actions so coastal flooding, inland flooding, severe weather, very much take care of the same actions, or the same actions apply to those hazards. Drought and extreme high temperatures, a little bit different, so you'll see the column of actions that address those. And then we had to come up with a priority and short, long-term, or ongoing. And we will have this all completed and in the draft report, in the report. So these are the highest priorities. On this page, we're concerned mainly with the Sawmill Brook, complete evaluations of hydrology, hydraulic restriction, deteriorating condition of Central Street Bridge, to prepare for a new bridge design, permitting, and implementation. And alongside that, implementing a restoration of Central Pond to improve flow habitat and providing flood mitigation for adjacent properties. So that's the design that has, is in one of the info sheets that have been created for Manchester. And then there are actually 5 other, I forgot to take out the Central Bridge and the pond. There are really 5 other Salmo Brook projects already that have been identified, but they would still need the whole process of design, permitting, implementation. And that would be for like a culvert resizing to reduce flooding, and you would work upstream. So you start at the bridge and work up.
Culvert resizing where? Here at the Central Street?
Yeah, so that's the first one. So the Central Street Bridge or tide gate or culvert, whatever you want to call that. And then you can see how it's going to be impacted with sea level rise and storm surge, the orange meaning more intense. And so that is underway right now with a bridge grant and an MET, Massachusetts Environmental Trust grant, that's just doing hydrological modeling or study. It's not modeling, it's actually, they're out there taking measurements since last December, all winter. So they've got that, and there will be analysis that will be done by June.
And wasn't there, is there some possibility of removing the dam or the tidal
Removing the
gate
tide gate,
completely?
right.
Okay.
That, so the studies indicate that by doing so, you greatly improve the flow and prevent flooding upstream.
Right.
And that was one of the things that you really have to have done the study to make sure that what you do is going to be effective for everyone.
And does
there's-
it have any impact? I mean, on the picture before this, it showed a lot of, and of course, a lot of, hard surface around the Sawmill Brook, the macadam or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And are there any ways to increase the pervious?
Yes, that is, there are actions that are calling for that going forward, right? And so you can just see from that second picture over by the street bridge, it is, what was it?
It's in
It was
poor shape.
considered it a dire condition, one of the worst
Yeah, it's one of the
bridges
worst in the county.
in the county, okay.
Wow.
So, and I think the Manchester Coastal Stream Team identified this, saw that it was one of the highest priority in the previous FEMA plan, and has been working for the past 6 years to get this moved up because, if something blows out in a storm, it just goes back the way it is. And how can this make the community more resilient? And that's the whole goal of these conversations, is to how to make it more resilient. So this has also been work that's been identified. None of these have been financed or designed, but there's your flood storage upstream at the School Street culvert. Mary?
I just wanted to say that one has been funded and actually somewhat started in terms of planning, and that's the poorest paved parking lot over at Coach Field. And so we actually have plans, approvals for that, bid documents. We just need the money now to build it. So.
So all these grants are a process. First you have to be accepted, and then it's all about design, and then you have to go back again and look for money, and it's always very competitive. Flood storage at the Coach Field playground, green infrastructure. When you say green infrastructure, what it means is that it's there are different ways of doing it, but it is using trees, vegetation, depressions, rain gardens, things that will absorb the water in place and get it back into the groundwater rather than flashing off from the paved surfaces.
So if we do flood storage at turf fields, then, and there is an event, then we have to do repairs to the turf field after that, right?
Well,
I was on the school building committee,
And that was one of the things we discussed, was that that field would be flood storage, and
You
what
are
we
Jessica Lamont.
Jessica Lamont, sorry, 21 Walker Road. We were reassured that all those little pebbles are supposed to like bind together and
Yep.
not necessarily all. So that was what we were told.
Okay, so we won't have to spend $50,000 replacing little rubber bits after that.
Hopefully not. They told us they would stay there.
Good.
Well, you know, that's one of the things that's happening across the state now is more and more communities are looking how they can, inland as well, how they can store flood waters. And so we're going to get a lot more experience with what works and doesn't work. Here's a photo of the harbor, and these next three deal with downtown and the harbor. So it's sort of a, you know, put everything in the, I think here we're called lumpers. Increase Manchester Harbor's resilience, semicolon, protecting docks and piers, reinforcing seawalls, restoring natural areas. So it's not just looking at one way to do it, but looking at all the different ways, and also developing, implementing stormwater outfall retrofits to improve water quality and reduce sedimentation, which then causes you to have to dredge your, the harbor. Improve the downtown stormwater system, which is now under capacity with surcharge with the ocean outfalls, so you can't get the water out of downtown because you've got a high tide or a storm event on the ocean side. Retrofitting, promoting green infrastructure to reduce runoff and impervious surface, and creating more stormwater storage. So we haven't come up with, like, you know, exactly what that's going to be, but these are priorities. And then what is really important is that you have these in your plan so that when an opportunity comes, you can go back to the state and say, this is a priority, this is what we want to do. And the state already has an action grant that's going to be funding some of these. And Manchester just applied for one for last Friday. Increase downtown resilience. So the downtown, of course, is very critical. So it's about studying the effects of hardening, where seawalls or roads might be needed, and where softening or green infrastructure may help. And with this, understanding and maybe updating zoning for more green infrastructure incentives. Right now, you can't make people do it, but maybe there's a way to incentivize when there's a redevelopment. And then encourage relocation of utilities from basements and lower elevations, you know, getting out of the floodplain area.
Could you get the printing off and just look at the harbor for a minute?
Yep. So just go.
The entrance of the harbor. I'm a tremendous advocate of the Dutch. The Dutch know more about water than anybody in the world, and they're saving Venice finally, and they've been saving London up because they have the Thames is already taken care of. Right across that nice narrow bit up there is where a Dutch gate costs millions, but it would save billions. And it would prevent the storm surge that would wipe out everything from there into probably C Street.
So let's go forward because it's in here. You weren't, yeah. So I think it's the next one. So in here is, yes, it's in this slide. So this is about the wastewater treatment plant. It's in the 100-year flood zone. So evaluate options, and it's not saying this is the right one. It's, do you relocate it? Do you join SESD? Do you build a harbor barrier or protect in place? Building a floodplain, a flood wall, and elevating. So one of the things we talked about in the workshop was also having like a trigger point. So you say, well, we can remain in place till, you know, X feet of sea level. And I know that there's elevation data being collected on the wastewater treatment plant now, so we should be able to, you should be able to say, this is where you can get to. You know, you're fine up to this point, and then what you have to do, and that's the trigger point. We're getting that point. What are we going to do? And having looked at your options, so you're not just up against the wall. And that also includes evaluating the condition and location of pump stations, and possibly on-site wastewater treatment plant in other parts of town. Number 2 was, the second bullet here is evaluate long-range possibilities, including relocation of town hall. So that whole complex here, police, emergency, wastewater treatment. So it's evaluate long-range possibilities for relocation and construction of a Manchester Harbor sea level rise storm surge barrier to protect multiple assets, including the downtown. And so this is one of the fact sheets that's been created for the wastewater treatment plant, and we have these fact sheets all out on the table there. There are 10 of them, so anyone can take them, and we have been distributing them at the workshops. So this one talks about what possibilities at the wastewater treatment facility. Evaluate and implement floodproofing of the town hall, and then all the police, dispatch, emergency, and the harbor master. Moving vulnerable assets at least 3 feet above base flood level, floodproofing doors and openings, elevating electrical, mechanical, and communication systems, and upgrading and relocating the generator to a higher ground. So this is probably something that would be, I haven't looked at it, but it's probably more of a short term than the harbor barrier idea being maybe long term. More high priorities, had a lot of high priorities. Enhance emergency preparedness by assuring the town has enough backup generators, encouraging the town-wide use of reverse 911. You already have it, but encourage people to use it. Conducting more resident visitor emergency preparedness education, including location of shelters. It turned out no one of the 51 people in the room, there was only one person who knew where the shelter would be if they needed to use it. So communication came out as an important part of that can be done now. Assuring seniors can be evacuated. We looked at senior housing, and most of it was not necessarily in a hazard area, but at the same time, the power might go out, or tree comes down, whatever, and we need to be assured that they have a way of being evacuated. Ensuring radio emergency communications are compatible with other systems. People were very concerned about the cell towers going down, and we all rely on our cell phones, and now you don't have them.
We're just connected.
Yeah,
by power.
yes,
Where's power, everything goes.
right. Educate the public on evacuation routes. It sort of goes back to the shelters. Reinforce. Assess vulnerable roadways at risk of flooding. So there's a lot of discussion of particular roads and that do flood now. Reinforce them, like the Selma Brook, change the culvert size or elevation. And then people really were talking about how to keep streets open, like Beach Street, or there's an area on Route 127 over by Brookwood. And then people also said we should consider what happens if a road needs to be abandoned. Not that they're planning on doing that, but just begin having those conversations.
Well, there are further repercussions if there's a need for a backup fire. You've just excluded Beverly from assisting on fire. So there's
Right, if 127 was down.
Secondary and tertiary considerations to this.
Exactly. Working with National Grid and Verizon to conduct tree work to reduce storm damage. So it wasn't like, let's cut them all down, but let's make sure they're pruned so that we can reduce the storm damage that everyone experienced this past winter. Harden electrical systems to reduce power outages. So no one knew in the room what the electrical system should happen to it, what are the conditions or where it is, but they felt that that was really something that should be analyzed and included. And then several people, one group felt that plan for redundancy and explore feasibility of a micro or smart grid for Manchester, for maybe surrounding communities, rather than just relying on that one line. Okay.
Can I make just
Yep,
one
you wanna say
comment
something?
about the pruning around utilities? I agree it's an important and a good thing. My experience has been that sometimes the contractors working for National Grid are aggressive and not necessarily so sensitive to the neighborhood's needs when they actually do the pruning.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it says working with,
Yeah,
not give
that-
them.
yeah, good.
It didn't say give them the reins.
And I
It
wrote
said
the
work
exact
with
same
them.
thing down.
I don't think
because-
anybody
yeah.
wants them to come in and make the U's right through the middle of the tree that they've done in so many communities.
Well, they just came up our street, and the way, don't want to hold it up, but the way they pruned was, it did not seem, well, no, not even that. It didn't appear
Aggressive.
that they had anybody who understood how to properly prune, so that the trees won't suffer from the way the pruning was done. And
So I know that Manchester now is working on a tree inventory, which I fully support, and part of that is finding out, what condition the trees are. Do they need to be pruned? Are they diseased? What kind of tree they are? And that might help guide what needs to be done. That's just a start. So this is one of the areas that, again, this is a fact sheet that has already been developed about Chubb Creek and Bennett Brook and Causeway Brook, all areas with the 127 and issues with flooding.
Speaking of trees that are imperiling things, the state has 2 trees in front of Coolidge, the Coolidge Reservation, 2 huge, very dead trees. They're on state property, they're not on Coolidge property. Those trees are going to fall across 127 because they're both leaning that way, and they're going to fall on a set of houses there, but mostly they're going to take down power lines. And I wish we could get the state to take those trees down.
At the workshop, we had Bruce Tarr came to one of them, and Brad Hill came to the other one, and that might be a good thing to mention to both of them and see if they can get on it, because I know how hard it is to move things along. Now we're moving into moderate priorities. It was hard to come up with what's moderate, what's low, and what's high. So, take this all with a grain of salt, and it doesn't matter if it's like a moderate priority, and if a grant comes along or an opportunity comes along, you still, you would still go ahead and say, well, I haven't checked off all my high, I won't do my moderate, but that's not the way it works. So, evaluate the fire station. You can see the fire station right there. They've sandbagged the door. Their resilience options, and then flood-proof. Update, relocate generator to higher ground, repair brook abutments, and evaluate what conditions would require relocation. Again, what level, 50 years out, 100 years out, 2 feet out, 5 feet out, what is that of sea level rise? Encourage the state to examine options for a more resilient commuter rail. Getting in and out of Manchester, a lot of people take the commuter rail, and that makes Manchester a very desirable community that you can hop on the rail. Some of the ideas were elevate rails, move it out of the coastal area, have alternatives such as water taxi and bus systems. So even though that's something that Manchester can't do, it will be included in the report, because I see the state saying they want to use this as to inform state efforts. And so if nobody says they care about the commuter rail, then it's going to get ignored as it is. Evaluate fuel tank locations, elevate at least 3 feet above base flood elevation. Conduct any toxic use reduction, business emergency preparedness planning to reduce any risk. And then this is the drinking water. So they felt that it was important to protect the drinking water supply from Gravelly Pond, at Gravelly Pond, Round Pond, and the Lincoln Street wells. Remove prohibited non-water supply activities from Zone A and Zone 1. I know those are not in your community, but that is your water source. Develop and implement groundwater and surface water supply protection, on and on. And then ensure drinking water supply sustainability by maintaining water mains, conducting leak detection, but then also implementing alternatives to municipal water use for irrigation, and have water use restrictions in place so that they could be enforced if there was a drought. This one was important to many people because it's a cultural icon, a plan for resilience of Tucks Point Rotunda, and I know that it's been repaired many times. So maybe looking at that as, well, you know, what is the long-term solution? What is, instead of rebuilding as is and spending a lot of money, maybe there's something else there that would keep that cultural icon. The beaches and salt marsh systems were definitely a very important a part of Manchester, and the people who live here value these. So evaluate beach and salt marsh systems vulnerability, and then understand beach erosion and landward migration for salt marshes to inform long-term policies. Singing Beach, monitor, evaluate sustainable options. So they were looking more here at shoreline protection, restoration, but also the bathhouse. You know, there's water lines that go there, there's waste, there's the bathrooms there. Perhaps the parking lot would be a green infrastructure. Just different ideas came out for Singing Beach. And then update zoning and regulations to improve protection, conservation, restoration of brooks and wetlands. And again, going back to incentivizing increased flood storage capacity in green infrastructure. It's not going to just happen because you feel good about it, probably. You really need to somehow come up with an incentive program. The lower priorities were, we've had the Manchester Harbor at a high priority, and this was Manchester's resilience by protecting its eelgrass. And that's it definitely stabilizes the sediment and is an important habitat, nursery habitat for all the things that live out there. Protect towns' parks, undeveloped land, conservation area, manage tree canopy, we've talked about that, and increase flood storage. Those are sort of already been mentioned for different assets. And then assure adequate water for fighting wildfires to protect parks, open space, woodlands, and the homes that are in those or near those spaces. And lastly, encourage protection, increase flood storage and buffers along brooks, and examine water use restrictions during droughts. And that's a summary of the risk matrix. Didn't go into short-term, long-term. The report will have a lot more in it than that. I know I've appreciated interviewing and talking to each of the selectmen, and I need to do that with you now, Becky. But we do want to hear from you. This will be on, hopefully on Cape Ann cable, and so we do want to hear from people. Mary has some comment sheets, and if people could send their thoughts or concerns to Mary via email or drop it off at the town hall by June 7th. And now if we sort of ran through all that, the report is due June 30th, so it will probably be on the website in July.
Is it going to be in written form?
It's in written form. Printed form? Yes, it will be printed, yes. Yeah, it's not going to be, yes, we will definitely get you a printed copy.
There's two,
Thank you.
there's two things I'm surprised are not covered.
Okay. And are you
And
writing
one
this down?
is, I'll write it down, but I'll share it with you now.
Okay.
One is, and I've talked to Mary about this, and it was, part of my serious trepidation as this was getting off the ground, and I fully support what the intent of this is, but I continue to be very bothered by the fact that we've got all this information, we've looked at the impacts to the town, we've looked at the impacts to utilities and emergency services and all sorts of things, and we haven't addressed the property values of potentially people in these very large swaths of land not being included as part of this conversation, that they may not be sitting on the $1 million property that they once had. If this does play out the way we're saying, all the way out to 2050. And I think as part of the conversation, we've got to figure out a way, and maybe it falls back to us and the town administrator and the planning board, but we've got to have a conversation in this town about what ifs, not just tied to utilities and the flooding of the fire station. There's at least 20 properties, starting with the fire station and continuing up that estuary, that are now having floodwaters potentially, taking up 50%, if not to their foundations of their houses.
Yep.
And those people are taxpayers, and those people are probably, some of them are probably young families, but majority of them are probably folks that are either on the backside of their careers or lives, and that's actually equity. And I think we've got to really pay attention to the impact, because it trickles down into the tax base of the town. So it's not just what we owe to residents, it's also in the interest of the town to do a little mental calculation on what all this means to tax revenue. Because if valuations drop as a result of this, they're going to, our revenues are going to drop. So this is whole nother dimension of this analysis, which I think is fantastic. But to me, that's more of a concern. Arguably, there's more at risk for the town from that than there is from a water holding facility on the other side of 128, which may be getting a lot of attention as a project. But I'm wondering about the property owners just down the street here. The second one is related, is what about the impact to business in town? And if there is a flood, the magnitude you're talking about over the next 20, 30, 50 years, Seven Central's dumpsters floated away in the last one. I mean, I expect in the next major flood for that thing to be probably taken out at the foundations. There's businesses down by the train station. We do, this is a personal opinion, but I think as a town, we don't do a very good job supporting business in town. That's a personal opinion, not the view of the board. But I'm very sensitive to that topic, and I think we owe it as part of this conversation to be having a chapter about what are we doing for business. Because if a storm comes through and wipes out business, we've just wiped out livelihood of potential residents. We've wiped out what infant tax revenue we get from business, which we're trying to grow. And we've also affected the health and I think the vitality of the town. I mean, if Seven Central gets wiped out because the waters creep up the backside, that's one of the oldest buildings in town. You may not like the food, but the restaurant is an iconic building. So there's the business aspect that I would add to this.
Yep. And communities are dealing with this everywhere. I was just recently at a conference, and remember the floodwaters that went up through Vermont, and they just increased the streams, and everybody that was along the stream, they just lost everything. This was in Wilmington, Vermont, and they actually rebuilt.
You go up there a lot.
Okay, they rebuilt their restaurant on site, and I saw pictures of how they did that so that the water could go right through their building next time. So, again, these are, do we want to stay in this place? Do we want to retreat? These are all kinds of conversations, and I know I've been on the CREG, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Group, and when we first talked about the barrier out here in the harbor, everybody was like, "Oh, that's going to cost a fortune," and sort of chuckled at it. But then when you start looking at the impact to Manchester, that might be something that's really should be looked at.
This is more for Greg. I think we really need an economic response to this as to what's the liability of the town if private property were damaged to the degree that we're talking about. What's the private residence impact? What's the tax revenue impact?
And that, it didn't get listed as an action, but it will be in the report that people did talk about, communication. They talked about doing that cost analysis of doing nothing versus, different levels. And I know that in FEMA, the assets were identified by in a value number. That's not what this workshop or MVP is supposed to do, but there's already beginning of that data that has been done for the town.
I think the Board of Assessors is going to have to change greatly. In the first place, I think we're going to have more assessors and more involvement in that, because I figure my piece of real estate has already gone down just by the fact that Ocean Street has had such a hard winter. And the valuations are going to change, I think, tremendously over time, and we need to be aware of that. Thank you.
As I said before, the bellwether is the insurance companies, and a lot of insurance companies will not insure in Manchester because of what's already happened with hurricanes. And this is very good analysis. I think this is going to cause a bigger economic problem. But doesn't change the reality.
Right, it's sort of coming to terms with the reality
Yeah.
and then trying to figure out what to do. And so this is like the first step. And out of this, Manchester will become a MVP community. They have that designation. There are expectations. This is a brand-new program, so we don't even know what those expectations are too much. But they will expect the town to be doing something over the next year. But they also will be coming up with more funding. Governor Baker just came out with a $13 billion environmental bill over 5 years. I don't know if it's made it through the legislature, but so the state is aware that.
Yeah, I don't think the state's going to be able to address the problems of the town on the back end of one of these storms.
No, but
If the insurance companies won't insure, then the mortgage companies won't lend.
Yeah.
And we are gonna have a problem with ultimately with taxes.
Yeah.
But you also don't want, I mean, you don't want to panic people.
No, we don't want to
And
panic people,
so-
but we also, it's not so much panic, but I don't know if you've tried to get insurance or if you've renewed insurance in your house, but there's only 2 or 3 carriers in the United States that will actually issue new policies in Manchester.
What I find interesting is that in Salem, they are developing housing in a floodplain
If the average
was,
house in Manchester is over $1 million, which it is. So, I'm sorry, I
yeah,
didn't interrupt you.
500 to 1,000 new dwellings
Mm-hmm.
in floodplains where they've experienced storm surge, and developers still think that they are going to be able to sell them and get insurance. So, some people aren't there yet.
Right.
We don't need to incite panic or fear, but there's some harsh realities of what happens when this actually information takes root. And I'm applauding the research, so, but the economic realities are very real. That are not, and I don't think they're part of the lens, and I'm not faulting this analysis, I'm just saying, as a town, we've got another mile to run beyond this. to
No, this
understand
is
what
like
it
a
means.
first
So
step,
the state
for
and the
sure.
federal government are not gonna bail us out. They can't, they don't have the money to.
I'm sure it's going to be hard for people who live on a hill and aren't surrounded by too many trees that will burn, that for them to think in these terms, because unless you're sitting in perilled parts, you don't think of it so much. And
Right.
it's going to be hard to persuade people that everybody is involved in this. This isn't just individual. It's the whole population that's got to apply their minds to the.
Well, as an outsider, since I don't live in Salem, in Manchester, but everyone I talked to, and we had a big distribution of people who came to the workshops. Everybody loved Manchester because of its ocean, because of its beaches, because of its downtown, because of its character. So, those people, if you say, okay, you're on your hill, but you're an island now, or you don't have services, they might change their mind.
We need them to understand all of this.
Right,
Even if they don't feel imperiled by it.
right,
That's all I'm saying.
yeah. So that's all about communication, right?
So you said that over the next year, the state wants to see some motion, will want to see some motion. I'm assuming that that's partly in the filing of these reports and partly on the high priority items that you've discussed.
Right,
I'm
and
also
certainly
assuming that
Manchester's working, Mary's been working very hard. Did you want to say about the grants that you've?
Yeah, well, we're continuing to work on the grants. The most recent, we're applying for both the MVP, the first MVP action grant, plus a coastal resilience grant from Coastal Zone Management to address the pond restoration,
Yeah.
because that really has to be done in conjunction with the bridge.
Right, that's what I was getting at. That's the
Right.
tangible, the actual tangible thing
tangible.
that people will see an effect from in the relatively near future, and that's the thing that
Right.
people need to actually be paying attention to over the
Yeah,
next year.
Yeah, definitely.
And that would definitely qualify in this, because they are the priorities.
Jessica Lamoth, 21 Walker Road. I should probably know the answer to this because I'm on the CRAG and all these committees, but as I said to Mary recently, Mary's been doing such good work, and there's so many different grants that sometimes even those of us on the committee are kind of confused about what thank you, Sue, for nodding your head. So my main concern, especially with the money that just got approved to fix the bridge and the pond restoration, is I'm even confused about where we're at in that process, and just make sure we education so that because I think there is going to be some pushback against that project. So I just kind of, I guess, questioning where we're at on that and what we need to do to help out with the education piece.
Yeah.
Here you go. Have a mic.
Thank you. We need to do more, but one of the last steps in the MET grant process was to go out and hold a charrette with the abutting neighbors. And so that's going to be coming up in June. And we'll probably invite some of you to come along and participate. And we'll hear their concerns. I haven't personally heard concerns from people, but I know that others have. So we need to better understand what that could look like. So
I guess just my follow-up question to that is there a commitment? I mean, I'm chair of the stream team, and we have been all for getting rid of the dam, restoring the pond, so I'm 100% behind that. But I guess, is there a commitment from the town at this point that that's the direction we're going, or is this going to have to be sort of a decision from the town? I guess that's what I'm kind of questioning is are the selectmen committed to sort of going the route of eliminating tide gate and, restoring the pond, or is that something that's kind
Of removing the tide gate? The selectmen have not voted to do that yet. The selectmen are waiting to hear the results from these studies and from the engineering studies and recommendations from the Small Bridges grant before we would make a decision to that. Plus, we have to go and talk to the public in a very aggressive manner to make sure that they're well informed of all these options over and above the forms that you have already had.
Right. So those efforts will occupy a good chunk of the next year in terms of getting some designs on the screen and walking people through the different options. I don't think it has to be an either or. Either we have a big pond or no pond. I think there may be ways to maintain some of the aesthetics of a shallower pond and create really a nicer parkland back there that can be better than what's happening now, when at low tide it's a mud flat that isn't all that particularly appealing in some ways. It's all, the details are in the design, and I think it'll be critical that we come up with some creative designs that meet as many of those needs as possible.
So we will be finishing up the draft report and sending it out to people before it is submitted to the state. So you will be seeing the whole report in June.
Okay. So then we'll have you, well, at least at the very least, we'll have the report back here in June, and possibly you folks, but at least the report. All right. Any other questions or comments from anybody before we move on?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving us this time to do this.
Cheers.
Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, that's fine.
All righty.
Yeah, I can send you.
So, the consent agenda. So I'm going to pull this consent agenda completely apart for a couple of reasons. The Board of Selectmen minutes, so in the consent agenda, we have the Board of Selectmen minutes from May 7th, we have the OPEB trust document adoption, and we have a fire department donation request. The minutes, you can't vote on because you weren't there.
Right.
That would leave Arthur and me. I'm not going to do that. We're going to move the minutes out. We'll take care of them in another meeting. Just because I'd rather have at least 3 people who were there voting on them. The OPEB trust document adoption, I want to have a little bit of a discussion with Greg about here in this meeting. So let's vote now on the fire department donation request, which is to accept a donation for a water pump, I believe, $700 water pump.
Yeah, $750, yes.
And the fire
Says
chief has already
700.
written a letter of thank you for that. So can I have a motion to approve the fire department donation request?
So moved.
And I'll second that. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All right, the OPEB trust document adoption. Greg, I'm going to ask you to explain this a little bit, and I'll clarify for everybody, this is like the first viewing that we have on this document. It will be reviewed. It has not been reviewed by Finance Committee yet. It will be reviewed by Finance Committee, and then we will have a final review of it before we approve or don't approve it. At least one more, because we're down 2 board members, and certainly they'll want to weigh in. So, anyway, Greg, you want to go into some detail on this?
So this is similar to an investment policy that you adopted a few years back, but it's specifically targeted towards the OPEB trust. The OPEB trust is the other post-employment benefits trust, so it's basically monies that are being set aside for the future payment of health insurance for retirees. That's the principal use of the OPEB monies. So the auditors, as part of their last go-round on the audit, requested or recommended that the town should have a formal policy governing how that trust is managed, and that's what this document does.
Now, to be clear, those monies are already invested in the state funds.
Correct.
Which have a policy which essentially governs them for us. And the
Correct.
FinCom has reviewed that policy already. So we're not actually without any policy with regarding those funds. This is a formality almost.
It is, and because we're with PRIT, it is redundant in that sense, but the auditors still like to see at the local level these types of policies in place.
Conceptual, sort of, if I detach myself from the entire structure of it, I can understand that. Somehow it seems really bizarre for us to have a detailed policy describing the investments when we actually have delegated that to an organization which already has the policies dictating the structure. Is it to do the auditors want this because it then conveys some requirements that we have locally of the PRIT and the state funds? And if those things started to deviate, we would have some document indicating that we should consider other investment alternatives? What's the reason that the auditors?
Well, so PRIT may not always be there. We think, chances are it will be, but in case it were not to be available, then there would still be something in place locally. Future boards could decide to invest the dollars in a different instrument, but, and then again, this would provide guidance as to what that different instrument might look like.
Okay.
So it's a backstop.
Yeah.
To prevent not having anything in place if we were to remove ourselves from the PRIT.
Yeah. So I do remember when FinCom last went through our different accounts. So for example, our reserve accounts, our stabilization funds, and established the investment policies for those. They put quite a bit of effort into them.
Yes, they
and it
did.
took
Yeah.
a significant period of time for them to analyze that and come to a consensus on
Yes.
what that policy should be. So I'm sort of thinking that it's going to take possibly a little time for them to chew through this document and say, yeah, we agree. But I don't know. So I think it may not be just one more meeting or so before we adopt this. Is there a particular schedule that they have for wanting this thing?
There's no hard and fast deadline, so the auditors like, obviously, to see progress year to year, so they'll be back auditing us come August. So if we're underway, at least that'll show good intent.
Okay. All right, any questions from anybody on that?
No.
I don't think we even have to vote on that tonight. as
No, you don't.
much as just acknowledge in this meeting that we have reviewed it.
Yes.
And
No,
it's
that's
not
fine.
even a hard and fast 2 reviews. So town policy, we do a first review, second review, and then we.
Can do a final vote.
This is not the requirement for this. This is just our first view.
We'll follow a similar process for this.
Okay. Um, Okay. All right, so that's the consent agenda. And then we have some correspondence, which we're acknowledging, a National Grid letter regarding collective bargaining. Yet another fascinating missive from Xfinity regarding changes to programming that we get once or twice a meeting.
Yes. Yes, it seems that's the
Riveting.
case.
A document from Senior Care regarding the services that they provide for elder care, and Department of Waterways license for 7 Norton's Point for a dock modification that they're putting in, I believe. All righty, and now we're on to the town administrator's report. Take it away, Greg.
So coming up next Tuesday is a workshop session that you are scheduled to have. That'll be at a different venue. We'll be over at the Yacht Club on Tuesday evening from 6:30 to about 9. And the focus of that workshop is to look at your goals and priorities for the coming year, the coming fiscal year. So that's coming up for next Tuesday. And if you could send to me your topics or ideas that you want to make sure get covered. I'll be working with Susan Beckman on an agenda and a format for that evening. The different boards, the school committee held a joint session with both boards of selectmen from Essex and Manchester, as well as finance committee members from both communities. That was last week, talking about the projections for the Memorial School project, what sort of dollars that might be looking like, and different strategies in terms of timing and the impact of not only the Memorial School project, but down the road, an Essex Elementary School project and needs for upgrades to what is still considered a new building, but is quickly not becoming a new building, and that is the middle high school. So a lot to chew on in terms of numbers and how to best finagle the timing so that it can be less onerous to taxpayers and yet still respond to facilities that are, at least for the Memorial School in particular, past their useful life. So there are challenges there and more to be discussed. I think would be helpful, and something that Arthur has suggested as well, to have you as a board meet with the finance committee and really get into the details of different options for funding. And what do you see as the appetite, if you will, for taxpayers and new bonds and new debt. And so in looking ahead, we were thinking that perhaps sometime the week of the 25th in June would be a potential time to have a joint meeting with you and in the Finance Committee. So we will try to get a schedule that works for everybody on that.
I know I'm away already that week.
You are away that week.
I'm away the last week of June and the first week of July.
Yep, this is where the summer season starts to kick in. Okay. Right now, the Finance Committee is scheduled to meet on the 13th of June. So we might be able to piggyback on that meeting if people are around.
Yeah.
Can we, yes, if it works for everybody, but as part of that
Can we move to a model where they make a recommendation? Because I feel like they've been, from the conversations I've had with individuals on the finance committee, that they've been stewing on this for several months.
Right.
There's been some models that they've been kicking around informally, and I think as a function of as the finance committee, that the finance committee should have a position at some point and tell the board what they think it should be. And I think, it's an iterative conversation in the end. It's not a,
Yeah.
it's, well, it's not one way, but nonetheless, it'd be good to start with a recommendation. So at least we're not having just groupthink.
So are you saying, Greg, that we might meet that on the 13th after the FinCom meeting, or around there? Is that-
Well, so I was trying to look at alternatives to that last week. The challenge of meeting on the 13th is that the FinCom won't have finalized a recommendation.
So we can meet on the 14th.
Yes. We could meet later that week. So we can look at some possibilities.
Okay.
But, so stay tuned as we try to work out some dates that can work. Last two items. Obviously, the roundabout trial is still underway. Lots of comments coming in. Some pro, some con. It's sort of a mixed bag. There are. How many pro? I don't have a tally. But I would say the majority of calls have been negative, but there are some positives out there. There's still some fine tuning of the design in terms of that temporary layout. It suffers from not being the full blown layout and giving the right geometrics and deflecting people enough to actually slow them down, particularly on the eastbound folks coming from Beverly on Bridge Street. They're tending to fly through, and that's causing a good portion of the problems. So DPW, as they have time, they're trying to improve some of the signage and the layout as we learn and observe how it is working or isn't working. So that'll continue for 2.5, 3 weeks more here. And the DIP is supposed to be doing some surveying and videoing of the actual movements through the intersection.
So what is the date that this ends?
It was approved through June 8th.
And then what's the point at which we review it? Has that meeting been decided, or?
We haven't set that yet. I think it'll depend on how quickly analysis can be pulled together and survey results. They do want to do a post-trial survey and see what, try to get some data that way as well.
There's no particular, we don't have a rush to a deadline to make a decision on the project, because
Right.
we'd be looking for grant funding, and it's another year out. So this is quite a ways out, if at
True.
all.
I do think that, given that the town has just isn't being put through this experiment, I think people are gonna wanna
Have some resolution.
or just have some position, whether or not there's funding to do anything. I think people are gonna wanna know, what was that? And was it good or was it bad? And then we can, if it's good, if that's what we conclude, then getting money is a whole nother separate exercise. But I think popular sentiment is gonna wanna know, did this work? And to that end, I think between June 8th and whenever it is we do meet, I personally would love DPW in particular to have a position on whether or not this was successful or not. I don't think it should come back to the board to unpack whether or not this worked. Because I will speak for myself, I'm not a traffic engineer, and I'm not sure that I'm the qualified one to determine the fate of the town as it relates to roundabouts. I have my personal opinions, but I don't think that's very steeped in science.
Yep, no, that's fair.
Is there a listening session planned for this Thursday? I see correspondence on that.
I think the DIP is hoping to sponsor
Okay, it's just
a forum. Yeah, I think it's part of their regular meeting.
But just like I personally don't feel like Chuck he inherited this. So in my opinion, Chuck's not responsible for having borne this. But nonetheless, Chuck is a very qualified professional, and he will have lived through it, and I would like to know what Chuck thinks.
Sure, yeah.
Mhm.
And in many ways, his objectivity is probably one of the best arbitration devices we have.
Yeah.
And it would, I think, be an important part of the process, which I think is more to my point.
Alrighty, what else you got?
That'll do me, I'm done.
Does anybody else have anything not already covered they want to make a comment on?
We've covered plenty tonight.
We have. We have had a bit of a ride.
Started off with a bang.
All right, then, I will make a motion to, okay, yes, Adele.
Question. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about that $500,000 that
Well, I
we
can't
are,
hear you, I'm
the
sorry.
insurance company is paying, I believe, but I wonder why we don't know more about our legal cases in the course of a year, how many that the town is under. We don't have to know particulars, but I believe the public whose tax money is paying for these things should have some sense of what our caseload is, what is about. I mean, at least we could know what it's about. And we don't, but I think that's very important for us to know as the public and as a taxpayer. And I wondered if there was some way that we could be informed regularly about the caseload as cases come up. And is there any reason why we shouldn't?
No, in fact, Mr. Bennett reminded me in one of the bylaws, it's supposed to be part of the annual report that the selectmen give.
Yeah,
And so we'll make sure that's happening.
Yes, I really think we should. I mean, I understand the legal part. I'm not worried about. I'm worried about just knowing.
Right, just the number and what the basic
knowing
topics are. And,
what we're paying for.
Yep.
And so I would appreciate it if we could get some regular information in that line.
Since you mentioned it, I just would like to clarify one thing. The lawsuit that you're talking about, the $500,000 suit, that was covered by our insurance carrier.
Well,
So-
I know it's being covered by insurance, but we're paying for insurance too. You know, it all comes out of the taxpayer's pocket one way or another. And just because you have a lot of insurance means somebody's paying for it. And I just would like to know a little bit more about what we're paying for. Thank you.
Okay. Then, any other comments, questions? No. Nope. Okay. I'm going to move that we adjourn tonight's meeting. Can I get a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?